And we are live here to chat about what we watched this week. And at this point, what did I not watch this week? Because pretty much every show was coming back from the dead this week, even maybe the ones that I wanted to stay dead, not pointing fingers or naming names at all. But we're going to be talking about the return of Flash, or return to the past season of the Flash. We're going to be talking about Superman and Lois, and of course, what I am perhaps most excited about is we are going to be talking about WandaVision, at which point Kate is going to be gracing us with her theories of the week, which have, if you've been paying attention in the past, been turning out to be pretty accurate and definitely insightful. So I'm very excited about that. We may also touch on a couple of other things we watched this week. Why are other sites making noise in my head right now? I've got a lot of tabs open, both figuratively and literally. So we'll get through it, and then we'll go through some recommendations for this week. Spoilers, Flash is not on my recommendations for this week. I have actual good content to recommend to you. So without further ado, I know, Kate, without further ado, Kate, say hi. And Kate, do you have any news for us this week? Did anything happen? Should we be excited about anything?
Unless you're hinting at me to say something that I don't remember anything fun that happened. I remember I sent you plenty of things this week. Okay. Yeah. No, just me. Hey.
It is
Just me obsessing about WandaVision this week.
Kate joins us
Per
without news. We
usual.
didn't really have much news this week. I was trying to go through, like, did anything happen? I guess Superman and Lois got renewed for season 2, which I thought already happened, but it came across some, like, feeds I tracked this week as if it was new news, so I guess that's new news. Some other CW shows, there was like a round of second renewals, whereas a bunch of the other shows like Flash and so on, they got their next season renewal already like a couple weeks ago at this point. So I think CW is just kind of renewing a lot of things, crossing their fingers and hoping for the best. So we'll see how that goes. But other than that, there wasn't really anything new announced. There were just some new episodes. So this is our main segment, but I'm going to keep it so fast, as brief as possible. Carrie says, "Good evening, ladies." Good evening, Carrie. Carrie, I know you watch Superman
Hey,
and Lois, and
Carrie.
I would like to hear your thoughts about it. I watched the pilot and second episode of Superman and Lois, which is all that's out so far. I watched the new episode of The Flash, which was technically this season's premiere, but it wasn't. It was like mostly pieced together from last season. And then, of course, we were graced with a new episode of Batwoman, which I quite enjoyed. So that made up our package for the kind of typical CWDC shows that I watch. There's some other ones. We got some pictures of Supergirl's filming. There's others going on. Those are the ones we're talking about this week. So I'm going to kick us off talking about Superman and Lois. Now, Kate, I promised you that I was going to kick off Superman and Lois in the format of me pitching it to you, as in, here's why you should watch it. And while I will admit that has been difficult, because it's hard for me to, in good conscience, like I pride myself in high ethics, so it's hard for me to hold to those ethics and also lie directly to your face and tell you to watch something made by the CW. I've done that before and I'll do it again. So here we go. This is a segment I would like to call Cammie convincing Kate to watch a show that she knows is not even worthy of being top 10 on the list of shows Kate should be watching right now. We'll workshop the title of the segment, but that's our working header. So imagine for me, Kate, that there was a Superman show where you can completely ignore literally every single thing Superman does and only pay attention to Lois Lane because she does have her own storyline, and Superman's storyline is so boring and predictable, it's not distinguishable from the commercials. Would you be willing to apply that filter in watching a television show?
I mean, we watched Arrow, right?
Excellent
I
point.
only watched for Felicity. Uh, I I know myself. I'm willing to try.
Okay. I'll take that and I'm going to run with it. So here's the thing. The problem with that premise that I struggled with, because that's the most effective way to pitch it, at least that's what's working for me, because I'm kind of filtering out everything that has to do with Superman. I don't feel negative towards him. I don't feel positive towards him. It's just what's going on with him is like incredibly cliche to me right now. Not that comic books are not supposed to be cliche. It's just like, it's just a little bit much. And he is not interesting of a character at this point, but I really am enjoying Lois quite a bit. It's very interesting to see her journalism storyline. I'll not throw shade at the Flash quite yet because we haven't got to them yet, but suffice it to say, we've seen CW, DC really dropped the ball when it comes to journalism storylines, making them non existent or extremely boring. And what we're seeing with Lois is 2 episodes in, bam, we already see passion for her job. We already see expertise for her job. We already see her succeeding in her field. We see, her name well known, but she's still having struggles with certain things, like she's still, it's not unrealistic to the point where she doesn't have to go through an editorial process and she doesn't have an editor trying to sway her one way or the other. And perhaps what's most interesting is it's not just tracking the hot story. She has a very clear, specific angle in the types of stories she's telling. So she is currently working on an expose that has political ties. It is tied to kind of like a business owner slash politician. They're kind of unclear as to like how far his reach goes, but all loosely, and I could be kind of incorrect in this, I would liken him to like a business lobbyist, somebody who's in business but has political influence. He's just supposed to be like your stand-in bad guy at this point. But what's interesting is seeing she has expertise. We see her reading through legal documents. We see, so that's been really cool. We also do get to see her be a mother to teen boys. So I think even those of us who are not mothers can acknowledge that's perhaps one of the most challenging maternal positions is being a mother to teens, right? So we see her come across a lot of challenges and she's still funny. She's still interesting. She is still quite human. She definitely in these first 2 episodes earns her place in the title. This is like, I am all for more screen time for women and I would call it out if they were not giving her enough. And so far, 2 episodes in, they are justified in giving her 50% of the place in the title. Carrie says the trouble with the Superman stories, it's difficult to make his story interesting. As a small town reporter, I'm intrigued by Lois's story. It's easy to be a pariah if you do small town reporting right. So true. And they don't hold back in how they're showing small town. So basically where they are, even though they are not necessarily raising their family in Smallville when the show starts, most of the first 2 episodes take place in Smallville, and we can reasonably believe they will be in Smallville for an indeterminate amount of time. And with that comes all of the kind of like pressures and politics of small town. Interestingly, we have her sister, Lana, there. I did not watch Smallville, but I'm well aware that that is sort of a reference to a past love triangle from Smallville, the CW show back in the day. Lana is in a very unhappy marriage that I suspect will end. So they're just setting it up for like, there's the potential for drama, but there's a very interesting story going on with Lois. So there's that. And to keep those who are interested in romance, because while I like Superman and Lois in this show together, they're not like, I would need to be more invested in him to be like invested in their romance. They are just a marriage that exists. They are not necessarily a marriage where I'm like, my heart is melting. They're their sons are in high school, and there are hints of like potential romances there that are probably going to be more similar to the CW department of romances. There's a potential issue there where like one of the twin Superman boys likes a girl who currently has a boyfriend, whatever. So there's that in the romance department. None of that has grabbed me quite yet because they are fairly young, but I can see that they are heavily aging down these boys. These kids are not whatever age they're supposed to be in high school. And when they want them to be a believable young adult romance and not like in their first couple years of high school, they will be that. So they'll get me there eventually. I'm just not quite there for like the sophomore junior romance, but like we'll get there. Anyways, we're here for Lois. That's the key thing. She has family. She has family with complex histories. She has a close relationship with Lana while it also having issues. We have, that is who we're here for. So I am not pitching to you the show Superman and Lois. I am pitching to you the show a few extra commercials than you signed up for and Lois. Thoughts?
I would be willing to try. Uh, it still kind of very much sounds like some other CW superhero shows and it has some of the things that kind of drove me away from the other ones, but I will probably give it a try at some point.
It's early on. It's early enough into it to where there's only 2 episodes out anyways. So it's not like you'd have to
Mm-hmm.
like marathon a whole bunch to catch up. Carrie in the chat says, I do think the idea of a morally corrupt Superman is an interesting story, though. They've teased that with Captain Luthor. Right. So with as with any Superman story, you're not going to get far without a Luthor being there. So they're already teasing. There's been a lot of family shown on this, villain shown on the classic elements of the Superman story very early on that I thought they would potentially hold off till later on. And I'll give you an example. Them using the Luthor name this early on was kind of like, oh, they're not saving that for a, couple up, mid-season finale, whatever. The fact that Lana shows up in the pilot, I would have thought maybe with CW drama, typical patterns, you'd have like, oh, Lana's come to town as like the kind of heartwarming slash sinister season 1 end, and you're like, oh, I wonder how this new character is going to add to the plot. You know what I mean? They seem like they're burning through, not necessarily burning through story fast, but they are getting all characters, all names, like they're not holding back something for like a shock value reveal, and that buys my trust a little bit, even through like questionable stories. I will say there's been a couple things that are like subtle, but if like CW romance patterns, which I would say if we know nothing else, we know that. There's been a couple sort of hints to the fact that they are not committing to a romance at this time. And I'll give you an example of that. There is a repeated mention, one of the twin boys, he has like a girlfriend in the big city, but most of the first 2 episodes do not take place in the big city. I don't remember what city it's supposed to be. I think it might be New York, Chicago, some large city that they are from but are currently in Smallville. He has a girlfriend back home, and they mentioned her name. Her name is Eliza, I believe, and they go so far as to commit to a name. They go so far as to commit to the fact that he has a girlfriend, but there is a scene where he's supposed to be like FaceTiming her, and then like his brother walks in and they have like a little conversation and he hangs up, whatever. And in the moment where he's FaceTiming her, and like, if this is just a matter of my eyes being bad, somebody tell me, and that's fine. In the moment where he's FaceTiming her and hanging up on her, you see her enough to get like a general idea of what she looks like blonde, whatever, but not enough to where they've committed to an actress. At this point, they could sub out anybody for her. Like you get this really quick glimpse of her. So that to me, that's like such a minor thing. And I know I'm reading a lot into it, but that to me is saying they've not committed to whether or not they're going to, whether this, because they've also hinted at potential romances for him in Smallville, obviously. They've not committed to whether he's going to be in a love triangle in Smallville, if he's going to stay with his girlfriend, if he's going to break up with his girlfriend, and then his girlfriend's going to show up. Like, there's just a little bit of like a lot non-committal aspects to the romance department, but committal aspects to the characters in this world that I'm willing to deal with the non-committal side. Hopefully that made sense. Watch Lois. Ignore Superman.
Okay.
Okay. So we move on to the Flash, and I'm not going to pitch it to you. I'm not, for a couple reasons. Number one, I'm not pitching the show as a whole, and that's not to knock the idea of the show as a whole. I was watching a interview this week. It was like an Instagram live interview with Danielle Panabaker from The Flash. And she said in the writer's room, which she's kind of been like, aside from just being a main cast member, she's also been like involved throughout the show, and she's directed, and she's been in the writer's room. She said in the writer's room, they have like the 3 words that are like leading the show. And that's, I'm not even gonna remember them off the top of my head, but it was like heartwarming, heroic, and it was some word for like cheesy, but it wasn't cheesy. But just like basically, this is supposed to be like the cheesy, happy-go-lucky, light, whatever, feely show. And I'm not knocking the premise of that. You don't get that in this week's episode. You don't get that in the last season. And I have to believe you're not going to get that in the upcoming season. Now, I will still continue to watch because there's a few characters that I am watching for at this point. Primarily Team Flash, Caitlin and Cisco. But the thing is, in this first episode, I mean, you do not have to be a rocket scientist. You do not have to be familiar with TV. You do not have to be familiar with anything to know that this was not a season premiere. Now, that is because in the last season, they got cut off in like filming everything because of Corona. So the last 3 episodes of season 6 became the first 3 episodes of season 7. Okay, like, unfortunate pacing, but we can kind of work with it. But in feeling like this wasn't a season premiere, I couldn't help but realize it felt so far removed from approaching a season end as well. There was no air under its wings. There was no tension. There was no anything. They had some key characters gone. So the character that I'm generally most excited about is Caitlin Snow / Killer Frost, who is basically like their Felicity and Black Siren combined. And I know we didn't like Black Siren, but it's like if Black Siren was done well combined with Felicity, except for Felicity had more of the skill set of Gemma Simmons instead of Felicity. Like, it's a good character. I'm watching a crap show for her and Cisco. Okay, so like they have to be good to warrant that kind of behavior. She wasn't there because she was supposed to be on maternity leave at that time. However, I will say it seems like they are making a smart decision. So she was supposed to be out for the final 3 episodes of the season, because like that was how they were written, because of her maternity leave. But because of COVID, that didn't actually line up. So she's only out for the 1 that was already filmed. And then next week's episode, episode 2, she will return. So I'm hoping things will pick up speed a little bit, but like they have dragged out these storylines way too long. Like Iris being off in the mirror dimension, they have dragged that out way too long. It's kept her way separate from the rest of the team, which was the entire problem with this character to begin with, that they refused to integrate her with her family, with her friends, with her job. They made a like, I'm going to call it a joke. It was not funny. Like it made, like if you have any, like I just on principle feel like I'm supposed to be rooting for female characters, even if it's not like my favorite character. So like with Iris, I feel like That's not even my favorite character because they have not written her well. They've not integrated her well. They've done her no favors, but I still feel like on principle, I need to be like rooting for her best interest, right? They made this joke, Kate, that like my blood was boiling. So she's in a mirror dimension and they have her going crazy. So like I'm not even going to unpack how much that premise of that storyline for a character that has repeatedly been couched as being crazy throughout the season is kind of like a problem to me. But they have her like interacting with like a vision, basically, who's like a mean person. It's basically like she's interacting with like a mean version of herself from the past. Okay. And she's supposed to be on the computer, and this character comes up and interrupts her, and like without much other context, basically says like, "What? Did you lose your dissertation?" This girl has been working on her dissertation, working on her dissertation. They refuse to acknowledge it. They refuse to whatever since the first episode. Okay. People have gotten married and had children since then. Like, does nobody on the amount of anger that I feel on her behalf is unwarranted for somebody that once again does not even like this character. For other characters who I'm like constantly being like, I wish they had more screen time. I wish they had like with Caitlin and Cisco. I wish we had more time to explore Cisco's family and like before his brother had died, we had some time to explore that. But even he got more character development. I wish we had had more time to explore Caitlin and give her like a chance at happiness or whatever. But even she got that and an alter ego and exploration of her family and talks about her degrees and like we see visions of her with children. You know, like there's just like a lot that they at least give an attempt at. The entire premise from the pilot of this girl is that she's working on her dissertation. They have since had her get married, get kidnapped and killed like tons of times, interact with her future, just anything in the world except give her something of their own. And they had the nerve in this episode to make a quip about like, oh, did you lose your dissertation? No, y'all lost her dissertation when you chose to turn her into this character who has to give her little brother a brother husband a pep talk every episode when he messes up and refuse to give her any accomplishments of her own. The saddest thing about this show is that the closest thing they have to a female friendship is between a girl and an alter ego of herself on multiple occasions. The closest thing we have seen to like any valuable female interaction is between Caitlin and Killer Frost, and now between Iris and evil versions of herself. Like the mind boggles. Also, I get that I'll give a little bit of credit where credit's due, even though it's kind of awkward and annoying, but they have clearly recognized that the show has like a romance and chemistry problem. And for a show that is like even more so than Arrow, supposed to be rooted in like romance and feel good and heart or whatever, like for them to have a chemistry problem and like a romance problem is like a big problem. And I think they knew it early on and they just didn't want to fix it. And like, here we are. But they have introduced a couple new characters. The girl's name's Allegra. I don't remember men's names. I'm lucky if I remember any characters' names. That they're kind of like setting up some sort of romance between. They're like members of the team in, you know, like basically one subject matter expert, another subject matter expert. I can see them being kind of cute. So like I see that they're trying to fix a problem they have. I see that they're taking steps to fix the romance problem. I need them to fix the overarching issue with how they write women or the lack thereof, because kind of like the weird catch 22 is I refuse to believe that you can have a truly deep, believable romance in which at least one of the characters is a woman without writing women well. You must, if there is a woman involved in the relationship, unless it's a male-male relationship, if there is at least one woman involved in the relationship, you must be able to write a woman well. So even with them getting the hintings of chemistry between Allegra and whatever the guy's name is, that's basically like leading the team while Barry fricks around, I need to be convinced that they can write a woman well. And I am not convinced that they can write a woman well because they have not done so for the one woman who they kind of need to write well. Carrie in the chat says, I can't share anything regarding Flash. I decided to
Of
stop
course,
watching,
we're
but
in
I'm
the
here.
Dead Sea. It's not salty.
I'm here to listen. I'm gonna assume this is a record-breaking Flash rant. I mean, it was a season premiere. It deserved a rant of its own. From here on out, Kate is going to hit a buzzer anytime I rant longer than 4 minutes about Flash. She's going to hit a buzzer at the 4-minute mark. Kate in the chat says, a laughing emoji.
Okay, I will.
Okay, Kate, I'm going to let Flash rest in its grave. And I'm going to turn over the talking stick to you.
Okay.
This is a bobby pin, but I'm turning over the talking stick to you.
Thank you.
Dig us out of this depth of despair and bring us into the world of good television. Talk to us about WandaVision.
But then go into more emotional despair.
Yes.
So I am dressed as Wanda today, you know. So I kind of want to start actually at the very end of what happens, well, close to the very end of what happens in episode 8. And I just want clarification. I just want to know that you and me are on the same page about what happened.
Okay.
When Wanda sees the heart and she breaks down in the middle of the empty lot and she's crying, do we interpret that as her creating the hex and vision as a accidental manifestation of her grief, or was that a choice she made? There is a right answer.
I see it as a manifestation of her grief. I don't know that I would use the term accidental, but if I had to choose between choice and accidental, I think I might choose accidental if it's her doing it. Like, I acknowledge that this is all like perception and perception's not reality, and it could be that somebody else is creating it around her, but it really does seem to be sold to us as she's created it. I would go as it's a manifestation of her grief, and I'm gonna pick accidental over choice. Did I get it right?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm fully there with you that they could still be playing a bait and switch with us on some level. But based on what they gave us, I am now going go and talk about psychology that I have no credibility to talk about, but we're going to do it anyway. So, in actual psychology, there's this thing called dissociative amnesia. And anytime, much like other dissociative disorders, you can experience a traumatic event and your brain basically makes you forget certain memories to basically protect you from having to remember that trauma and continue to live with it. It's a survival technique. So, much like how the first time we see this happen with Wanda, when she first loses Pietro, she falls down and you can see a power surge from her. So you mix the power surge that she had been, but now she has even more power. She's more powerful than she was in Ultron. Mm-hmm. And you mix the fact that she has even more grief in her life. And I want to say that both the human psychology and the mix of her powers has come in and basically created this fantasy and also took away most of her memories of what has like her actual grief, because I think that's a big portion of it is she doesn't remember a large portion of what happens before being here. Mm-hmm. And I think you could say it's some way protecting her. And you could even argue that, okay, this is bad, that she has created this if she truly is the one that created this. But it could be a lot worse. If she was allowed to feel this trauma more, she could have torn a hole through the multiverse. She could have all this other stuff. People could have died. In this aspect, I mean, yeah, people are under mind control, but at least nobody's dead. So there's that. And then you apply that whole thought process of her not remembering the certain events throughout the entire season so far, from 1 to 7. And as things would occur, she would start to get pieces of her memory back until episode 7, when she was in that. depression, as we discussed last week, she is reaching a point where she has to completely get Agnes, the therapist. I mean, she still would question her motives, of course, but she definitely kind of does this really great thing for Wanda and puts Wanda through basically PTSD exposure therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So she has to relive some of the biggest traumas in her entire life, and has to kind of confront, now that she has created the hex, this is what she has done. And now she has to remember that all the things that's going on, so that way she can possibly stop it. I also think it's really interesting too, because how she has coped with this is she is using sitcoms, which I think we've all kind of suspected sitcoms were some part of her childhood, and that's why she picked them. But understanding and seeing that every single traumatic moment she felt like she followed it up with a sitcom, you could also argue that, yeah, it was a comfort to her, but she also probably started associating sitcoms with trauma. It was a coping mechanism, but they also started to kind of have their own residual meaning of trauma. And so they became unhealthy in their own right. So this whole entire process, even without the interference of Hayward and Agatha, it was never going to work because it already had trauma intrinsically created within it.
Mm.
So as we're seeing it fall apart, we're still seeing the other aspects of her, like mental stability, falling apart. So we've had the grief, but we've also now seeing how the memory is affected by this whole thing.
Mm.
Um, and now I have the theories. So remember a few weeks ago I said something and you like stabbed me through the heart. So I pointed out, what if everybody feels Wanda's pain? We actually got a couple of hints of that this week.
Okay.
Flashback says she describes feeling grief when she's talking to Vision in that flashback. She describes grief as drowning. Monica, after she gets out of the hex, describes it feeling like she was drowning.
Ooh.
And I
Okay.
want to then add an and or qualifier that it could be happening with or in place of this. When Wanda, at the end, we see a couple familiar faces, but it's like they seem very sad. It's an extremely depressing area. It does not seem like the happy, cheery neighborhood that we have been watching. What if something, like there's something up with Westview with the multiverse, and the people that were snapped that lived there didn't return, and Wanda's hex, for as many problems as it has caused, returned the people, or like returned the memory of the people that were snapped and never returned. So we never see Mr. Hart. We see Mrs. Hart, and she looks devastated.
Mm-hmm.
You see Jones, but you never see Dottie, and he looks sad. You see the delivery man, and he looks sad. They all look sad, and it's all a dark place. So what if one or two or both of those um, was a bigger explanation of what's going on, and especially with her bringing people back from another dimension, is how it connects to the next movies and everything else.
I like that, and I like in particular this idea of like, okay, so she has used TV to as a coping mechanism, using that loosely, but it's kind of been an outlet for her feelings. We see like, by the end of this episode, everything will have been a dream, right? So when we consume media or whatever, we may be feeling what is a part of it. So by her essentially creating this TV show and broadcasting her grief, it is allowing others to feel what she is feeling, not just in the literal sense of what you're describing, that those who enter Westview are feeling it, but also just it is her way of communicating her grief. She has broadcasted out the way she has communicated emotion from other sitcoms, positive emotion from sitcoms.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Because
So
there's
then
kind of
there's,
two layers
I have
to it
another
then.
one. This one's just gonna be sad. Yeah, yeah. That well, and there's a lot of things that you can tell are missing. That they're going to reveal a whole bunch of little things that are going to put everything in place. And
Okay.
there's still going to be tons of stuff left over that they're going to have to do in the next movie. But yeah. So for when we get Wanda opening the deed and she sees the heart drawn on there, there's two things that could mean. Neither one of them are fun. So back in the beginning of Infinity War, you see Wanda and Vision, and they're talking, and it almost seems like he's going to propose. Back then, she still would have needed permission to come back to the United States, which implies to me that he had already planned this and gained permission for her to return to the United States back before Infinity War, and had already purchased this deed for her,
Okay.
if that is in fact the case. However, it also seems like somebody planted that there. And with the fact that I think Hayward wanted her to resurrect Vision when
Mm-hmm.
she talks with Hayward, I think Hayward is trying to manipulate her in some way, or somebody was trying to make her break down, make her feel all these emotions, make her make poor, poor decisions for whatever reason. Once again, they want her to tear open the multiverse, is what I think. And then, of course, there's a sad connection with that heart. I think it's the heart that you see in episode 1 on the calendar when they think they're trying to figure out why is there a heart there. So the heart is something to do with like the day on the deed.
The day, like move-in day.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. It's
Um,
interesting what you, first of all, love and hate the theory. Like, I'll just die inside, but I'll keep talking anyways. It's interesting what you
yeah.
said about Hayward trying to get her to feel her emotions in order to use the power, because we already know that up until that point, she was trying to bottle in emotions at like every step of grief, her childhood drama, losing her parents, losing her brother. And even after losing Vision, it still, like when she's going to see his body, it still seems like there's a lot bottled in where she is repressing it. We see her previously using TV to repress it, but obviously it's part of like a broader repression mechanism that she's using. And in trying to get her to feel it, he's trying to manipulate her and get her to use her powers for bad things, like to create a weapon for him. But the end result is by getting her to feel it is what is actually going to eventually get her to work through it and go through the 5 stages of grief that you outlined last week. So maybe he
Mm-hmm.
meant it for bad, but it will turn out for good, to use kind of a biblical
Mm-hmm.
metaphor.
Yeah. Also, there's plenty of like heartbreaking little Easter eggs I noticed. One I noticed was in the flashback when they see her parents. Her mom greets her by covering her eyes like they do in episode 1.
The traditional greeting.
Uh, yes, the Sokovian traditional Sokovian greeting. Um, so and then kind of at the very end, with the kind of small origin story, because it's really important to inform us what's going to happen next with her and Wanda. So very clearly, she's a morally gray character in the beginning. I mean, she kills all those other witches because, but I mean, they are trying to kill her, so you could argue. But it's very clear she's power hungry, and she doesn't necessarily fear her own power, but she wants to control it. And what I think what brought her there was the her knowing there was an immense power in rescue, being very curious of it and wanting some for herself. So she comes, and then she meets Wanda, and she is very confused by Wanda. But then throughout episode 8, she starts to empathize with her and see this person who has no training, has no understanding of how to control this power, much like how she didn't either. But the tables kind of turn when she finally realizes who Wanda is, the Scarlet Witch, and you finally see Agatha hear her. And I think that's going to fuel that interesting level of her understanding Wanda not having anybody in her corner. She has nobody in her corner, while also being afraid of the power that Wanda wields. That's going to be a really interesting dynamic of how that kind of falls out. Because I don't necessarily anymore think that she's pure evil. She does a lot of bad things, like just holding the kids hostage and manipulating her at
She's
every turn
babysitting
to
them.
her
They'll
even
be
increasing
just
psychological
fine.
detriment. That's fine. It's fine. They'll be, it's, they watch Yo Gabba Gabba, they eat sandwiches. It's pretty cool. That's how I babysit.
Yeah.
Um, so I, I think that's going to be a big part. And then obviously, what's going to be a big part is the white vision that we see at the end. But I really have no. That's very much a comic booky superhero. We're just going to see some people fight, and somebody's going to die, and somebody's going to live, and we're just going to watch, and we're going to be sad about it.
I have a prediction regarding the vision that we saw at the end, and it's not founded in
Mm-hmm.
any sort of comic book stuff. It's maybe just what I think could happen. I also have not seen the
Mm-hmm.
promo, so okay, well, let me start with a question before I go into this. In the promo, which I didn't watch, because I'm watching this directly on Disney Plus, and the promo just doesn't air right after, so I've just somehow kept myself unspoiled, which is so not like me. Do they show what we'll refer to as White Vision? Do they show him like fighting alongside Wanda, or did they show him fighting Wanda? Do we know what alignment he is? This is my question.
I don't know, because in the only like trailer I've seen for episode 9, it was actually just like an edit of mainly episode 8 scenes with them of one thing that would be in episode 9, and that's it.
Because I've seen, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it looked like, but I saw a still from episode 9 that looked like a Incredibles reference. Like it was like her and the kids, and I think Vision was in it. I saw it very briefly,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all like in a fighting pose, as if they were all like facing common enemy. Is that what was in the promo?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
Yeah, that was it.
okay, so based on that, it would appear that he is fighting alongside them. However, I'm wondering if it is some kind of bait and switch wherein he is actually somehow under Hayworth's control and is a weapon built with Vision's body but not Vision's soul. And somehow Wanda and Agatha, perhaps with other witches, perhaps not, have to work together to basically like take him down, him, the weapon, so that Vision's body is not being used as a weapon and, ruining his memory. And in doing so, that would have to be Wanda coming to terms with the fact that Vision is actually gone. And it would put her in a kind of anti-heroine plus anti-heroine alliance. I know Agatha may be more villain than anti-heroine, but I'm seeing both of them as kind of anti-heroine, just on different areas where Wanda is very close to the heroine scale and Agatha is a little bit further from it. But if they did do a season 2, it could then be Wanda and Agatha trying to like work together in some way to keep the remains of Vision away from Hayworth, maybe trying to take down Hayworth's corrupt company or assisting, um, Monica or what anybody else in kind of taking him down from the inside. I don't know. I'm trying to piece together where this could go for season 2. And for this to be set up for a separate season, it would need to end with them taking what Hayworth wants, but not destroying it. So they're taking the weapon, but not necessarily destroying it. So she would have to come to some level of acceptance, and it would have to set us up for seeing Agatha and Wanda in some ways working together in season 2, whereas for this season they were mostly working apart. Thoughts?
I like that idea. However, I do know that they've already confirmed that the continuation of Wanda's story is going to happen. The next thing for her is in Doctor Strange.
Okay.
Now, I've also seen that they've also established that she's pretty much going to be the focus of Phase 4 or whatever that is, however many movies that are. She's going to be a very big, prominent focus. So they have plenty of opportunities to kind of do other things with her. I don't actually think they'll be doing a season 2 either. They could make another TV show, but I think this is actually more sold as a limited series than anything else.
To set us up for the
Especially
next phase
since
of
it is so
movies.
very stylized to the idea of the sitcom. Yeah. So I don't necessarily think that we'll get a season 2 and like a different show. Agatha could stay or should go. I don't know. And for as much as I want the story, the WandaVision story to mainly focus on Wanda and her journey with grief and everything, there is still parts of it that can lead to the big multiverse and because Doctor Strange, the name is the multiverse of madness, so it's not that far out to kind of assume that they're going to start something with the multiverse in the finale of the show. But tie it to her grief or whatever decision she's made. On that aspect, I did actually come up with some thought, some process. A lot of people were really on Twitter were really curious, like how Hayward was tracking Vision. If he was made of like tracking the vibranium, if he wasn't real. To me, I was still like, I mean, even if it's a alternate reality, everything in there is still made of actual matter. But then I got to thinking about like the laws of thermodynamics because that's how my brain works. And I'm like, you can't create it, but you could take it from someplace, which then made me think of season 4 of S.H.I.E.L.D. So when they did the Ghost Rider scene or storyline where they were taking things from other dimensions. So much like how I said that she brought all these other people back, she brought the materials needed to make Vision from another dimension, and not consciously, or maybe consciously, we don't know, just based on my other theory. But I don't necessarily, I wonder if all these people and the materials to make Vision were brought from a different reality, and that's how we start to get to where we're going. Because I see Hayward very much as a villain for this, but I don't see his story going much further past the end of this show. So they're going to have the events of this show make implications for what happens in the movies, but maybe not make it just Hayward's vengeful actions, and it be more of like the consequences. So more dimensional stuff, more crazy stuff that you would see in a Doctor Strange movie.
I am really excited for this to transition to the movies. I see in the chat, Carrie says, "Are we sure we're getting a season 2? I thought this was just a season 1 deal." So it sounds like he's on the same page as you. I have not been spoiled on the show at all, so I was just sort of like, I enjoy this and I want a season 2. Sounds like we're not going to get that right at this time. Totally respect it. And I like limited special, like one-off seasons. Queen's Gambit was my favorite of 2020, for example, and that is a, one-off event series. So I like that where it's like a limited story. They tell it, they start and end it the way they want it to, and it doesn't continue forever. And it still is certainly an homage to the format of TV throughout, not just in the fact that it was released in the format of TV or is being released in the format of TV, one episode a week, and you're having to wait for it, which I think is excellent for this story as much as it's, there's cliffhangers and people have to wait week to week and that can be frustrating. I think that's good for the story, but also that they're paying homage to, the entire history of sitcoms throughout. Carrie also says in the chat, Agatha might be morally gray, maybe some good to her, but I can't forgive her for killing Sparky. Oh, don't shoot me for saying this, but I absolutely can forgive her for it because I like that she's morally gray, and what better way to show that she's morally gray than her killing sentient beings? That's like the whole that's what makes her gray instead of just a kind of irritating heroine, because that's a whole other category. A lot of times irritating heroines or unlikable heroines get falsely painted as anti-heroines, and they're not. They're just irritating or unlikable, but they're still heroines. She is a somewhat likable but still irritating anti-heroine because she's sometimes a bad person. I like Agatha.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can tell.
Well, and I always thought that the death of the dog definitely played into Agatha's manipulation of Wanda, testing her, seeing if she could push the bounds, make her do
Make her
magic.
use her powers.
Make her use her powers, and even for a dog, bringing something back to the light, which I still am arguing that she can't actually resurrect anybody. Resurrecting a dog would still require a lot of energy.
Well, Kate, we have 7 minutes left. We are going to nix the reading segment entirely for today because I know both you and I have not really been able to do much fun reading this week, and we'll go ahead and nix recommendations.
What, you don't want to talk about natural ventilation? You don't want to talk about natural ventilation systems?
That's I would love to. That sounds so much fun. Engineering. This is why you're going to get paid the big bucks. You made a smart degree choice, Kate. I hope you know that. Okay, so we'll nix reading and we'll nix recommendations. And I had a salty Cammie corner planned for this week, but honestly, I used up all of my salt on the flash, so I'll save my salty Cammie corner for next week. So that leaves us with 5 minutes left. So Kate, I want to give those 5 minutes to you to talk about WandaVision and what are the things you have gotten right so far. So like your Hall of Fame, what predictions are you most proud of getting right? And what predictions do you want to stamp your name on for next week? What should we come back next week and be like, did I get this right or wrong? Take it away.
So there was actually some confirmation about Wanda avoiding processing her grief in this episode. There's actually 2 lines by Agatha saying, like, what was it? I wrote it down because I was like, that was exactly what I said. So she said, but you're so crippled by your own self-doubt that you believed it. Like I said, fear and guilt making her do mistakes, and then creating a ridiculous fantasy, but you'd rather fall apart than face your truth. Again, I was just so excited about that. I was just excited that we got full confirmation that she was all the strength. We kind of got confirmation too about like the whole progress of why they changed sitcoms. Every time we saw a sitcom, it was a different one, going from her youth and how she would understand grief back then as a very black and white thing, and as she got older, she watched more modern sitcoms with dealing with even more and more complex grief. I was so excited about that. I was screaming with tears in my eyes. We got that one right. Um, I like I said, I don't have big ideas or really solid theories about what was going to happen more in the details of the action. I have like the multiverse theory or whatever, but I am more in the line of Vision's not going to survive, but I also don't think they're going to kill the kids anymore because that's going to be so dark. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, but I just don't.
Do you think it's that they're not going to kill, like, I I don't know that they would kill the kids. I wonder, which they might, but I wonder if they might present a reality in which the children never existed or are not real.
I fear, yeah, they're not going to actually kill the kids. That's something I know, but I don't think it's going to be very happy in any circumstance. They could go very dark and say that they were manifestations of her own imagination, and she has to lose her children because as much as they weren't real, they felt real to her. Um, but I think in the grand scheme of it, she's going to have to surrender a whole lot of things that she made to cope with. She's not going to have a happy ending. It's not going to be fun for her, but she's going to have to let it go
Mhm.
because for as much as this has been, whether she did it on purpose or not, this has been a somewhat selfish endeavor. You also know, she said it in the show, you know from her past, she is a person that does want to do good. She started the Hydra thing because she thought that they were on the right side of history. She wanted to
Mhm.
protect the people of her country. And um, so she's always going to do what she thinks, even in her height of grief and sadness. I think she's going to realize that she very much wants to do what's right. And she's going to tear it down. But boy, is it going to be sad. It's going to be so sad. And I think then she's going to have to accept that she needs help controlling it because, like, my thoughts were this was created really showing power in the Marvel universe so far, and yet she doesn't really have all that much control over her power. So she's going to have to make efforts to learn how to control that power before she does something far worse.
Mhm.
Whether that be with Agatha, Doctor Strange, anybody else. I will say if they bring in Doctor Strange at the very end and make him a big old savior, I'm gonna be so frustrated.
Same. And I kind of don't want to see
It
it
needs
be
to be
her.
her that saves it, much like Monica said. She's the one that started this. She needs to be the one that saves it.
Yeah. I kind of don't want to see it so obviously set up for her to re-enter the movie world or her to re-enter another person's movie. I would be
Yeah.
fine with an obvious setup for season 2. Sounds like we're not going that direction. It's fine. I'll live somehow. But I want it to close out this story if we're leaving this story in this world. Carrie says my only prediction is we'll get an Avenger cameo in the finale and it'll be Black Widow because, well, I want to see more Black Widow. I can 100% co-sign on that. I would love to see any of, I guess any of the Marvel women, but Black Widow would be cool. I guess it would be. I tend to say that my, at least currently, my favorite Marvel superheroine is Shuri. And I do consider her a superheroine, not just a heroine. I feel like she would not cross over into this world at this time. As such, I will accept second place, which is Black Widow, and we don't need to be ranking women against each other anyways, so maybe I don't need to do that. But I would love to see it. I'm right there with you on not necessarily wanting it to be Doctor Strange. Kate, thank you for tragically breaking my heart as if this week's episode
Yeah.
did not break it enough.
Yeah.
Very excited to discuss WandaVision with you next week, as we will then have episode 9 under our belts, and possibly the trash I will bring to talk about next week will be The Bachelor, because it'll be fantasy suite weeks. So, only the finest quality brought to the show to discuss. All right. Thank you. I will talk to you next week. Kate's information is in the description down below if you want to talk to her about more WandaVision stuff. She is very smart and insightful. And I'm Cammien Ray, and I will talk to you guys next week.